While you are afraid to become strong, you will be used. Introduction. The anatomy of your surrender. The world you see is a stage set. You believe in justice because it is convenient. You believe in kindness because you fear conflict. Your ethics are merely a fence you have built around your fear, labeling it as upbringing. For a biological system, such as human society, you are merely a resource. Energy to be absorbed, time to be stolen, attention to be monetized. You are used not because people are evil. You are used because you allow it through your passivity. A predator does not feel hatred toward an antelope. He is simply hungry, and she is available. Today, we dissect the story of Victor, a man who decided to stop being available. This is not a path to success. This is a path to power over one's own biology and the ambitions of others. Chapter 1. The Trap of Politeness. The Ritual of Social Suffocation. Phase, Encounter Monday, 08:45分. The office of Avant-Garde Consulting met Victor with the smell of burnt coffee and the hum of fluorescent lamps, which drilled directly into the frontal lobes at a frequency of 50 hertz. Victor adjusted his tie. It was tightened slightly more than necessary. A subconscious attempt to protect the carotid artery from an invisible threat. Arthur, the senior partner, was already waiting for him. He was not sitting at the desk. He stood by the window, hands behind his back. His silhouette against the bright morning sky seemed immense, overwhelming. "Come in, Victor. Close the door." Tightly. The sound of the closing door echoed in Victor's stomach with a slight spasm. Cortisol began its slow dance in the blood. "I looked at your report on the Technoprom merger. Tell me." Arthur turned slowly. His face was relaxed, but his eyes, two cold scanners, fixed on the bridge of Victor's nose. "Do you truly believe that I pay you to recount obvious risks to me? Or are you simply a coward who is afraid to take responsibility for a tough decision?" Victor felt his face flush with heat, his hands instinctively clasped in a lock behind his back. The posture of a captive. "Arthur Sergeyevich, the market situation is currently extremely unstable, and I... Arthur approached closely. Victor smelled his expensive perfume with notes of sandalwood and steel. It was the scent of power. "Your I is worth exactly as much as the profit it brings. Right now, it is worth 0. Go and rewrite it. And if there are risks instead of solutions again, do not return." Arthur did not turn away. He continued to stand in his personal zone at a distance of 30 centimeters. Victor took a step back. A small, almost imperceptible step, which in the world of biology meant, "I acknowledge your right to my territory." Phase, Psychological X-ray. Here we see classic social dominance through the violation of proxemics, spatial boundaries. Arthur is the alpha in this ecosystem. He uses the invasion of space to trigger a freeze reaction in Victor. Terminology. 1. Cognitive suppression. Arthur devalues Victor's personality. Your I is worth 0. Shifting the dialogue from a professional plane to a plane of survival. 2. Halo effect. Inversion. Victor perceives Arthur as super competent because of his aggressive confidence, even though Arthur might be wrong. 3. Adrenaline tunnel. Victor's brain at this moment sees only the threat. His creative and analytical abilities are switched off. Only the ancient brainstem is functioning. Biological mechanism. Victor's sympathetic nervous system has been activated. Blood has flowed away from the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic, toward the leg muscles. The organism is ready to run, But social norms force him to stand and swallow the humiliation. This dissociation is the root of future burnout and psychosomatics. Phase. Counter-strike lesson number 1. Never retreat physically. If someone presses you with space, your task is not just to stand your ground, but to lean slightly forward. This changes your status from victim to obstacle. Formulation. Politeness without strength is an invitation to exploitation. Your willingness to endure discomfort for the sake of peace makes you a slave to those who are not afraid of that discomfort. Phase. Sensory immersion. Victor left the office. The dust dancing in the rays of light in the corridor seemed to him like static on an old television. He heard the printer chewing paper, a dry, mechanical sound resembling the crunching of bones. The world around him was an unfriendly mechanism, and Victor had just realized that he was merely the lubricant within it. Chapter 2. Information Silence. Power over uncertainty phase. Encounter. A week passed. Victor did not rewrite the report as Arthur wanted. He made it even tougher. But this time, he provided data that made any objection impossible. However, the main tool was not the text, but silence. At the board of directors meeting, Arthur expected Victor to begin making excuses for the delay. Victor entered last. He did not greet everyone at once. He did not start fussing with his laptop. He sat down slowly, opened his notebook, and froze, looking straight ahead. "Victor, we are waiting," Arthur snapped, tapping a pen on the table. The rhythmic click-click-click sound was meant to set the tempo of anxiety. Victor did not move. He waited for exactly 10 seconds. In the room, the sound of the cooler in the corner became audible. On the 11th second, he raised his eyes to Arthur. Waiting for what? Victor's voice was half a tone lower than usual. He did not ask a question. He stated the fact of waiting. "For your report, obviously." Arthur began to grow irritated. His dopamine loop of expecting the usual bow was broken. "It is in your email. Since 6 a.m., I assumed you had studied it before the meeting, so as not to waste the board's time reading aloud." Victor fell silent again. He felt a thin string of fear trembling inside him, but externally he was a monolith. He saw Arthur hesitate for a second. His hand with the pen froze. Phase. Psychological X-ray. Victor applied the tactic of information deficit. In a normal situation, a subordinate tries to talk away their fear, giving redundant explanations. This provides the opponent with points for attack. Victor, however, created a vacuum. Terminology. One projective identification. Arthur begins to feel the awkwardness that Victor was supposed to feel. The vacuum is filled with the projections of the aggressor's own fear. What if he actually found something? Why is he so calm? Two status shift. The one who asks questions controls. The one who forces the other to ask questions dominates. Phase. Counter-strike lesson number 2. Silence is your armor. The less you speak, the more weight your words carry. Words are an inflationary resource. Economize them. Strategic conclusion. In any conflict, the winner is the one who is able to endure uncertainty longer. If you can remain silent when you are expected to scream or justify yourself, you have already won. Phase. Sensory immersion. The air in the meeting room felt thick, like cold jelly. Victor felt the texture of the leather chair under his fingers, cold, soulless, reliable. He no longer tried to please this room. He became a part of it. Chapter 3. Gaslighting and the destruction of reality. Phase: encounter. Arthur did not give up. After the meeting, he summoned Victor to the smoking room, an informal place where hierarchy is blurred, which makes manipulation easier. "Listen, Victor." Arthur put his arm around Victor's shoulder. This gesture was called friendly patronage, but in reality, it was a grip. "The colleagues are whispering. They say you have been behaving strangely lately, nervously. Perhaps you have problems at home? Wife, children. You know I always support you. But that tone of yours at the board, it looked like a hysterical fit. Everyone noticed it. This was gaslighting of the highest order." Arthur was trying to rewrite Victor's memory of the event where Victor was the winner, turning him into a hysteric. Victor felt a protest boiling inside. His first thought was, "What hysterical fit? I was calm." But he caught himself in time. To argue with a gaslighter is to acknowledge his right to evaluate your reality. Victor carefully removed Arthur's hand from his shoulder. He did it slowly, as if he were removing a dirty rag from himself. "Arthur?" Victor smiled, and that smile was devoid of warmth. "I like your strategy. To convince a person that his strength is a weakness. It is a classic. But let us agree, you will practice these techniques on interns. For me, this is boring. And yes, regarding the colleagues, tell them that if they have questions about my psyche, I am waiting for them in my office, with documents." Phase: psychological X-ray. Arthur used triangulation, referencing mythical colleagues, and the invalidation of feelings. His goal was to make Victor doubt his own senses. Biological aspect. Gaslighting causes a state of cognitive dissonance in the victim. The brain spends a colossal amount of energy trying to reconcile what I saw and what I am being told. This leads to exhaustion. Victor applied metacommunication. He brought the hidden mechanism of manipulation into the realm of the conscious. When you say, "I see what you are doing," the manipulation dies, as it lives only in the shadows of the subconscious. Phase: counterstrike. Lesson number 3. Your reality is not subject to discussion. Never prove that you are normal. The fact that you justify yourself confirms the right of the other to judge you. Strategic conclusion. Attack the motive, not the content. Not, "I did not have a hysterical fit," but, "Why do you need me to consider myself a hysteric?" Chapter 4. False vulnerability. A trap for ambitions phase. Encounter. Victor realized that Arthur would strike the weak link, the Sigma project, which Victor had been leading for the last 6 months. It was his brainchild. Arthur began to systematically devalue the project at every briefing. Instead of defending Sigma, Victor did something unexpected. He went to Arthur himself with a proposal. "Arthur, you are right. Sigma is stalling. It seems I have burned out. I have thoughts of transferring leadership to Mark. He is young, ambitious. I will prepare all the documents for him." Arthur's eyes gleamed. Mark was his protege, a loyal dog. Gaining control over Sigma through Mark was his dream. "Well then, Victor." A courageous decision. Acknowledging defeat is also a strength. Victor nodded, portraying a slight shadow of sadness on his face. During the following week, he handed over the affairs to Mark. But he handed them over in such a way that Mark saw only the tip of the iceberg. Brilliant prospects. Victor carefully masked the deep legal traps and contractor debts as technical trifles that he would explain later. Phase: psychological X-ray. This was a Trojan horse strategy. Victor used the confirmation bias effect. Arthur wanted to believe so strongly that Victor had surrendered that his brain ignored any alarm signals. Terminology: 1. False vulnerability, a demonstration of weakness to provoke the enemy into a hasty attack. 2. Dopamine blindness. The anticipation of easy prey switches off the analytical centers in Arthur and Mark. Phase: Counter-Strike lesson number 4. Give the enemy what he wants to steal, but ensure that there is a bomb inside. Victory does not always mean holding a position. Sometimes victory is a timely abandoned position that turns into a debt pit for the enemy. Phase: Sensory immersion. Victor sat in his car in the parking lot. The interior smelled of new leather and cold metal. He watched as the lights burned in the office windows. There, Mark and Arthur were celebrating their victory over him. Victor turned on the ignition. The soft roar of the engine echoed in his chest with a pleasant vibration. For the first time in a long time, he felt not like a participant in the race, but like its organizer. Chapter 5. Jurisdiction of Conscience. Why good guys always pay twice. Phase: Encounter Tuesday. 3 days had passed since Mark officially accepted the Sigma project. Victor was walking down the corridor when he heard shouting from Arthur's office. Mark's voice broke into a falsetto. "I did not know that the contracts with the Chinese depended on the personal presence of a representative in Shenzhen. It was not in the documents. The how. And what were you looking with, you idiot?" Arthur slammed his fist on the table. The sound was heavy, like a gunshot. The door swung open, and Mark flew out into the corridor, red, sweaty, with trembling hands. Seeing Victor, he stopped. His eyes filled with a poisonous mixture of shame and rage. "It was you. You set this up. You specifically did not mention the supplementary agreement." Mark shifted to a scream, trying to attract the attention of colleagues. "This is despicable, Victor. We are on the same team. How can you sleep at night, knowing that you set a person up?" Victor stopped. He did not begin to justify himself. He did not say, "I warned you." He simply looked at Mark, noting how Mark's carotid artery was twitching. "Mark." Victor spoke quietly, forcing Mark to fall silent to hear him. "You are currently trying to appeal to my conscience. No, conscience is a private category. In business, there is only the contract. Did you sign the Transfer of Affairs Act? You did. Did you confirm that you were familiar with all the risks? You did. Your attempt to make me responsible for your incompetence is simply a sign of your professional unsuitability." Arthur came out of the office, attracted by the noise. He expected Victor to start justifying himself before the team. But Victor turned to Arthur. "Arthur Sergeyevich, if your new project manager is incapable of reading 12 pages of text, perhaps the problem is not in me, but in your criteria for personnel selection." Phase: Psychological X-ray. Mark used moral blackmail and the projection of guilt. The goal of the manipulator in such a situation is to cause a feeling of wrongness in the target. If Victor acknowledges even a shadow of guilt, well, maybe I actually forgot to say, he automatically falls under the jurisdiction of Mark and Arthur. They gain the right to punish him. Terminology: 1. Interjection of guilt. An attempt to impose someone else's responsibility for their feelings onto a person. 2. Triangulation by attention. Mark shouted in the corridor to create a social court of colleagues. 3. Cognitive bias. The world is unjust. Mark believes that good treatment guarantees safety. Victor, however, demonstrates radical pragmatism. Biological aspect. Mark has activated panic mode. His adrenal glands are pumping adrenaline, but since he cannot physically attack Victor, the energy goes into verbal aggression and tears. Victor, however, maintains a high level of testosterone and low cortisol, which is biologically read by others as a sign of a dominant. Phase. Counter-Strike lesson number 5. Never justify yourself. Justification is an acknowledgement of someone else's jurisdiction over your conscience. If you performed an action that led to a result, it is your action. If another person suffered because of their own stupidity, it is their problem. Compassion is a luxury that you can afford only after you have secured your own safety. Phase. Sensory immersion. The air in the corridor seemed electrified. Victor felt the gazes of his colleagues piercing his back like small needles. But it did not cause pain. On the contrary, it gave a sense of density. He was a solid object in a world of jelly-like people. The smell of ozone from the working photocopier emphasized the sterility of his triumph. Chapter 6. Social camouflage. The art of being nobody. Phase. Encounter the situation in the company was heating up. Arthur began an internal investigation. Victor understood. A hunt would now be declared for him. But he did not go into hiding. He became transparent. During the following week, Victor behaved like an ideal cog in the system. He arrived on time. He smiled. He answered emails instantly. But in those answers, there was not a gram of valuable information. He used legalese as a shield. When the HR director, Arthur's protege, summoned him for a preventative conversation, Victor prepared. Victor, we are noticing that the atmosphere in the department has become toxic. It seems to us that you lack team spirit. Victor did not argue. He nodded with an expression of deep concern. I completely agree with you, he said, looking her in the eyes with almost frightening sincerity. I am very worried myself. Moreover, I have prepared a list of suggestions for improving team building. Here, look, 14 points, including joint meditations and trainings on nonviolent communication. The HR director was taken aback. She expected resistance, aggression, anything she could latch onto to fire him for non-compliance with corporate values. But Victor gave her what she wanted, a facade. Phase. Psychological X-ray. Victor applied social mimicry. If the system wants to see you as a team player, become 100%, but only externally. This is called cognitive decoupling. Your true self and your social role should not have points of contact. Terminology. 1 pattern. Interrupt. The HR expected defense but received hypercompliance. This knocks the ground out from under the manipulator's feet. 2. Information redundancy. By providing a pile of useless content, the list of team buildings, Victor hides the absence of real loyalty. Phase. Counter-Strike. Lesson number 6. If you want to destroy the system, become its ideal element until you find the lever. Do not resist pressure directly. Be like water. Take the shape of the vessel, but maintain your chemical structure. He who fights the system openly is a hero, but a dead hero. He who imitates devotion is a predator in sheep's clothing. Phase. Sensory immersion. Victor sat in the HR office, surrounded by motivational posters with kittens and inscriptions like teamwork. These posters seemed to him like the cave paintings of a primitive tribe. He felt the dryness of his lips and the cold taste of mint gum. The world was a theater of the absurd, and he had just flawlessly played his supporting role, preparing the main blow. Chapter 7. Radical Sovereignty. The Price of Freedom Phase. Encounter the final act. Arthur called an extraordinary meeting. He had incriminating evidence in his hands. Those very legal discrepancies in the Sigma project that Victor had allegedly hidden. Arthur decided to publicly crush Victor to restore his authority. "So, Victor," Arthur brought the documents up on the screen. "It is visible here in black and white that you misled the company. This is a forgery. I am raising the question of your dismissal under the relevant article and a lawsuit for damages. Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Victor stood up. He did not bring a single paper with him. He simply walked to the window, looked at the city, and then turned to the board of directors. "There will be no excuses," he said, and his voice filled the room like a heavy gas. "Arthur Sergeyevich is right. There are errors in the documents, and those errors were there from the very beginning, even in the primary audit reports that Arthur himself signed 3 years ago, when this project was just originating in his mind. I simply stopped masking them." Victor took a small flash drive out of his pocket and placed it on the table. "Here are the originals of those audits. Arthur knew about the risks of Sigma even before I joined the company. He used the project to withdraw funds through shell companies. Mark was needed by him as a scapegoat, and I was needed as a tool. But the tool broke." Arthur jumped up, his face turning crimson. "You are lying. This is a fake." "Check the serial numbers of the signatures," Victor answered calmly. "And yes, Arthur, I have already sent copies to the tax committee and the security service of the main holding 5 minutes ago. You have approximately 1 hour before people arrive here who do not appreciate your perfume." Phase, psychological X-ray. Victor applied a scorched earth strategy. He realized that Arthur's power rested on fear and secrets. By destroying the secret, he annihilated the power. This was an act of radical honesty, which works like an atomic bomb in a world of lies. Terminology. One, destruction of hierarchy. Victor no longer obeys Arthur's rules of the game. He created his own game, where the judge is the law and external forces. 2, terminal strike. This is an action after which a return to the previous state is impossible. Biological aspect. Arthur is in a state of sympathetic shock. His brain is paralyzed. Victor, however, is experiencing what psychologists call the dominant flow, a state of maximum concentration and clarity when fear disappears, giving way to pure calculation. Phase, counterstrike. Lesson number 7. Your strength lies in your willingness to lose everything. The one who clings to a chair, a salary, or status is vulnerable. The one who is ready at any moment to stand up and leave, taking the truth with him, is invincible. Freedom begins where the fear of losing social comfort ends. Phase, sensory immersion. Victor walked toward the exit of the building. He did not look back. Behind him, he heard noise, screams, stomping. The old world was collapsing. Outside, it was snowing. White flakes fell on the asphalt, instantly turning into water. Victor inhaled the icy air. It smelled of freedom and metal. He was no longer afraid to be strong. He simply was. Epilogue, your inner predator. Victor sat in a small cafe on the other side of the city. Notifications about the scandal at Avant-Garde were popping up on his phone. He did not care. He understood the main truth. The world is not an enemy. The world is a mirror. If you are afraid, the world will frighten you. If you are ready to use, the world will give you the tools. But if you have gained internal power, the world will simply step aside before you. Are you still here? Are you still reading? That means you are ready. Your lesson for today: find one thing in which you manifest weakness due to politeness. and stop it. Right now. Do not justify yourself. Do not explain. Simply do as you need to do. This is the beginning of your power. Chapter 8. Provocation of vulnerability. The hook test phase. Encounter after Arthur's fall. Victor did not celebrate. He knew a power vacuum is always filled by a new predator. 2 weeks later, he was invited to a friendly dinner with Boris, a shareholder of the holding, a man whose name was not mentioned in the press, but whose signatures decided the fates of entire industries. The restaurant was of a closed type. No music, only the quiet clinking of silverware and the whisper of air conditioners. Boris looked like a pensioner on vacation. A linen shirt, a soft gaze, warm hands. "Victor, you caused a real storm." Boris smiled, and kind wrinkles gathered at the corners of his eyes. It was impressive. No, I must admit, we in the holding do not really like such methods. It destabilizes the system. However, I see potential in you. Tell me, what do you actually want? Money? Power? Or perhaps you were simply offended by how you were treated? Boris leaned forward slightly, demonstrating sincere interest. He touched Victor's hand, a fleeting, almost fatherly gesture. Victor's internal monologue. He is looking for my hook. If I say money, he will buy me. If I say power, he will give it to me for rent. If I admit offense, he will understand that I am emotionally unstable. He wants to know which string to pull when I become part of his system. Victor did not remove his hand, but he did not respond to the gesture either. He watched as a drop of condensation slowly slid down a glass of ice water. "Boris," Victor's voice was dry, like old parchment. "You ask what I want as if you have a catalog. But the truth is that the only resource that interests me is the absence of the need to answer such questions. I want sovereignty, and sovereignty is neither sold nor bought." Phase. Psychological X-ray. Boris used the technique of false acceptance. He imitated the role of the wise father to lower Victor's cortisol levels and trigger a release of oxytocin, the trust hormone. When a person feels safe and accepted, they involuntarily reveal their true motives. Terminology. 1. Psychological profiling. An attempt to identify the dominant need: money, status, recognition. 2. Halo effect of kindness. The use of soft nonverbals, linen, warm hands, a smile, to hide a harsh strategic goal. 3. Mirror neurons. Boris transmits calmness, expecting that Victor will mirror him and relax. Biological aspect. Boris acts like an experienced trainer. He knows that aggression causes resistance, while softness causes submission. Victor, however, consciously suppresses the work of his mirror neurons, maintaining focus on analysis rather than empathy. Phase. Counterstrike. Lesson number 8. Your true goal should be invisible. Never show what turns you on. If the world knows that you crave recognition, you will be given a medal instead of power. If the world knows that you fear poverty, you will be kept on a short leash of bonuses. Your only answer to the question, "What do you want?" is a demonstration that you are already self-sufficient. Phase. Sensory immersion. The smell of truffles and expensive wine in the hall seemed to Victor like the smell of formalin. Everything here was preserved, dead, and dangerous. He felt the weight of his body in the chair. The center of gravity shifted down, providing a sense of unshakability. Boris stopped smiling. His eyes turned into 2 glass marbles for a moment. The mask was removed. Chapter 9. Shadow triangulation. Using attachments phase. Encounter. The system does not give up easily. A week later, Heavy artillery was introduced into the game. Victor received a message from Anna, his ex-wife. They had not communicated for 2 years after a painful breakup. Victor, I received a call from the bank. The accounts that were joint have been blocked due to some investigation in your company. I am scared. Please, let us meet. Victor knew it was a trap. The accounts were clean. No, he went. Anna was waiting for him in their old cafe. She looked depressed. Tears glinted in her eyes. She began to talk about how difficult it was for her, how she had always believed in him, and how everything was collapsing now. At that moment, a man in a gray suit sat at the next table. This was a message. We control not only your work, but also your memory, your past. Victor looked at Anna. He saw her subconsciously adjust her hair, a gesture that once evoked tenderness in him. Now he saw in it only a dopamine trigger that his enemies were trying to activate. Anna, he said, interrupting her flow of complaints. Did the man in the gray suit behind you pay you for this meeting, or simply promise to solve your problems? Do not answer. Just tell them. Using a woman whom I stopped loving 2 years ago is not a strategy. It is desperation. He stood up and walked out without looking back. Phase. Psychological X-ray. This was emotional triangulation using a nostalgic capture. Victor's enemies were trying to use his amygdala to trigger a surge of old emotions that paralyze logic. Terminology. 1 anchor, reactivation, using old attachments as a pressure lever. 2, emotional blackmail, an attempt to cause a feeling of guilt for the well-being of a loved one. 3, cognitive decoupling. Victor successfully separated the image of Anna from the past, from Anna, a tool in the hands of Boris. Biological mechanism. Nostalgia and attachment work through oxytocin and vasopressin. These hormones blur the boundaries of the personality, forcing a person to sacrifice themselves for another. Victor consciously shifted the focus to testosterone and norepinephrine, which are responsible for defending boundaries and aggressive problem solving. Phase. Counter-Strike lesson number 9. Your past is a weapons warehouse for your enemies. Conduct an inventory and burn everything that can be used against you. There is nothing more dangerous than unclosed gestalts. If you have left an emotional tail, it will definitely be pulled. To become strong means to become emotionally sterile toward those who are no longer part of your current strategy. Phase. Sensory immersion. The rain outside turned the car lights into blurred neon spots. Victor felt the cold drops on his face. This cold was honest. It washed away the remnants of the warmth that Anna tried to impose on him. He felt an emptiness inside, not painful, but clean and spacious, like in an operating room before the start of work. Chapter 10. The Philosophy of Internal Power. Final phase. Encounter a month later. Victor no longer worked for the holding. He created his own structure which dealt with crisis auditing. But he did not run. He returned to that same office on the 42nd floor, but now, as an invited expert from the side of the board of shareholders to clean up the legacy of Arthur and Boris. Boris sat at the head of the table. He looked aged. Well then, Victor, you won. You destroyed careers, families, reputations. You became that very predator whom you despised. Tell me, was it worth it? You are now alone, completely alone. Victor approached the table and placed a folder on it. Boris, your mistake is that you consider loneliness a price, but it is a reward. Power is not when thousands follow you. Power is when no one can stand in your way. He looked at everyone present, at Mark, who shrank in the corner, at the HR director, at the shareholders. You are all afraid to become strong because strength requires responsibility for your own darkness. You prefer to be used because it removes the guilt from you. Know today, this contract is annulled. Either you become the subjects of your own lives, or you remain the material for my work. The choice is yours, but make it quickly. I have little time. Phase, psychological X-ray. Victor has reached a state of radical subjectivity. He no longer reacts to social stimuli, approval, condemnation, fear of loneliness. His prefrontal cortex completely dominates the limbic system. Terminology. 1. De-identification with the environment. The refusal to define oneself through a position or the opinion of others. 2. Existential dominant. The understanding that power is not the possession of resources, but the ability to maintain integrity under any pressure. 3. Inversion of loneliness. Loneliness as the highest form of freedom from manipulation. Phase, counterstrike. Lesson number 10. Power is not something that is given to you. It is something that you do not allow to be taken from you. As long as you seek confirmation of your significance in the eyes of others, you are their slave. As soon as you become indifferent to what the pack thinks of you, you become the leader. Now remember, a leader has no friends. He has only allies, tools, and enemies. Phase, sensory immersion. Victor walked out of the building. The sun was blinding, reflecting off glass and concrete. The city hummed like a huge beehive. Victor walked through the crowd, and people instinctively stepped aside for him. They did not know who he was. No, they read his nonverbal status: a straight back, relaxed shoulders, a gaze directed into infinity. He was strong, and no one used him anymore. In this investigation, we have proven your vulnerability is your choice. You allow yourself to be used not because you are kind, but because you are afraid of the consequences of your strength. You fear loneliness. You fear condemnation. You fear the responsibility for your own teeth. But the truth is that it is always lonely at the top. There's no team spirit there, no family values of corporations, and no cozy approval of the crowd. There is only clarity and freedom. The world is not a home. It is a training ground. While you are seeking love, predators are seeking your weak spot. Stop being a resource. Become a subject. Become the one whose presence in the room changes the air pressure. Your last step. This story is finished. The screen will go dark, but your neural connections have already changed. You will not be able to unsee the mechanisms that now control your office, your home, and your bed. You have two paths. One, attempt to forget all this and return to the warm slime of habitual submission. 2, take a deep breath. Straighten your back, and in the very next dialogue, endure 5 seconds more of silence than your interlocutor can bear.